Hi everyone, my name's Kara McGuire. This week I was assigned as the person to lead the discussion for Chapter 7 on thinking. So to start out as an introduction, within this chapter, Skinner kind of proposes and discusses thinking from the behaviorist point of view. So he starts out by talking about the higher mental processes. And then he goes on to explain how thinking itself is a difficult field to study because it cannot necessarily be observed. Um, he goes on to say that thinking often means behaving weakly, so where the weakness may be due to defective stimulus control. Um, so an example of that is saying that for low probability that I think I shall go rather than just saying I shall go. Another example he gives for the opposing is that I think it is kind of a wrench rather than just saying I know it's a wrench. And he says that this is the doubts in the human minds that we're doubting ourselves. That's why we're adding thinking to those statements. Um, the next part goes into covert thinking, which refers to completed behavior on a scale too small that it cannot be detected by others. So basically, a behavior undetected. Um, he talks about for the verbal part of that is a person does not need to use environmental support to think or talk effectively as the speaker or the listener. The nonverbal behavior can also be covert thinking as well. So he uses the example of a chess player, in that a chess player, they have moves in their mind based on other moves that they had made in the past that had worked out well for them. So he says that covert behavior is always observed externally, and nobody has ever shown that covert form achieves anything that is out of reach of the overt. So basically, this means that thinking is a behavior which forms as a result of external stimuli and based on experiences, and is his argument throughout the entire chapter. So he touches on that all throughout the various sublevels. So, and that's kind of how I am going to lead this discussion, is touching based upon each of those subtitles that he has. So the first one is the cognitive control of stimuli. Um, so he goes on to describe our perception of the world around us, and says it's based on our senses. So we have the ability to discriminate between certain senses of which we enjoy, and then we can also pick those out of something. So, for example, we can hear birds chirping, and we can smell the scent of flowers. We can also defend ourselves against unwanted stimuli or stimuli in which we find painful or annoying, and block those out. So we can cover our eyes, plug our ears, plug our nose, etc. And some of those behaviors are due to evolutionary means and genetics, while some are due to consequences. Um, he does this part I thought was very interesting. We have the ability, he says that we have the ability to attend to or ignore stimuli coming from the same sense. So we can listen to a musical track and pick out the violin segment in a musical track. And we can also act to reduce stimulation. So squinting our eyes, holding our ears. And then some of these are part of our genetic endowment, and then others are produced by contingencies of reinforcement. Um, to explain that, an example he uses is a hungry pigeon is occasionally reinforced with food when it pecks a circular disc on the wall of an experimental chamber. When the pigeon itself is reinforced, when the disc is red, not green, it will not peck when it is green. After that, he goes into place learning. And the example he gave to explain this is he says that for there are two students who are going to answer an addition fact, 4 plus 3 equals 7. He says that only half of the students who can answer that problem cannot answer the opposite, so 3 plus 4 equals 7. And then he proposes the question, do the students truly understand the math concept behind it, or are they just memorizing the answer? This leads into search and recall. This is another cognitive activity affected by environmental stimuli and contingencies. So searching is a result of genetic endowment because it is needed for survival. Example is animals searching for food. The way an animal looks for food in a familiar environment is clearly dependent on its past success. Another example he gives is if we lose something, we tend to go back to the last place we found it, or we had it at that particular item. So I thought of, car keys or your purse, wherever you had it last is where you're going to look. For recalling, he says this was thought that we search for and access previously made copies of stimuli like faces and names, dates, places. In behavioral analysis, the probability replaces the accessibility. So the brain looks back for an answer in the category and brings it forward to the present. To help with this, he suggests using mnemonics. So to remember a song, for instance, listen to the song and then restart the song in your brain and doing it over and over again. To remember a person's name by going through the alphabet and listening to the sound the letter makes to remember their name. He does say, do not think of your brain as a computer. He says that he does not like that, and he doesn't like people referring to that. The next subtitle is the solving problems. So a person has a problem when some condition will be reinforcing, but they lack a response that will produce it. So the person will solve the problem when they emit a response. The example he gives is introducing a person to someone and forgetting their name. That can be solved by recalling the name or learning their name again. To solve more complex problems, we must come up with multiple actions. So analyze our multiple actions, analyze our outcomes, and then make a choice. He says that a choice is a problem to which a good deal of attention has been given when two or more responses appear to be possible. He then touches upon the creative behavior, which is the creative mind. So just as accidental traits in an organism are selected because they contribute to that organism's survival, accidental variations in behavior are selected by their reinforcing consequences. And that's an example of operant conditioning. This accidental variation in behavior is what is considered that original created behavior, and after something positive comes about as a result of that creative behavior, like writing a song, that a person may try to manipulate and deliberately vary the environment in order to produce more positive results, like writing in various settings. The next two sections are the structure of the mind and the thinking mind. So all that we have learned and think are in some way or another a result of genetic endowment and the environment. It is harder to prove what is caused by the environment because so much of this we can't observe or study. He compares the development of the mind to the development of speech and language, where a person who studies language can speak intensively on a child's vocabulary, grammar, etc., but they can't expand on the child's exposure to language all throughout his or her lifetime because they're not with them 24/7. Similarly, it is hard to study the growth of the mind. While a child may show behavior indicating or understanding of the concept of inertia, we can observe the countless times he or she pushed, pulled, or moves things. The last two things he touches upon is that the mind plays an important role where one image or memory leads to another in a stream of consciousness. And then the mind examines sensory data and helps us to make inferences about the outside world or find answers. For my discussion questions, I proposed two. The first one was went back to that looking to seek that seeking out a problem, but to discuss a time when a person or a name reminded you of someone or something and then helped you overcome a dilemma or reinforced a response you were seeking to a problem. The other discussion question is behavior thinking a result of external stimuli and consequences? If you do believe this, provide an example. If you don't believe it, then please explain why. All right, thank you guys.